I've got to have a crucial conversation. I'm real fired up about it. This one I am because I'm just mad.
We're going to talk about the tools.
Most people have not seen those done in emotionally healthy ways.
All of your relationships feel surfacey. Then you look up one day and you're like, why am I missing the richness?
Christians have to get this right because following Jesus expresses itself in the way we treat other people.
Why can't we just forgive those people and forget about it? Or maybe that is a way to handle it.
I had built up this conversation with Kevin so much in my head. We had that conversation. And you know what he said to me?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Live Change podcast. Today, we're talking about tough conversations. You know the kind, the ones that we're fearful to have. We're going to talk about that, how to navigate them, and how, if we have them right, they can actually make relationships better, not worse. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So what is a tough conversation? The kind of conversation that maybe many of us right now that are listening, we know in the back of our head, we're thinking about it. We know we have to have it. You can see the face of the person we have to have it, but we are paralyzed. We don't want to have this conversation. So what is a tough conversation?
You just defined it.
Yeah,
I think you just defined it perfectly.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I feel like
I'm that good.
It's the conversation you know you need to have but don't want to.
Yeah. And every time you say the word tough conversation, your eyebrows change dramatically.
What do you mean?
Like every time he just said it, it was like the tough conversation.
If you're not watching on YouTube,
like
you
Walter Cronkite
Yeah,
eyebrows.
it was like so intense.
Well, that's a great concept for a talk show. The tough conversation.
The tough.
Who would volunteer to go on that though?
So you're saying that in the conversation you go to the show to have the conversation.
Yeah. But
there
like,
I meet you with my big
yes.
eyebrows,
yes,
ready to have the conversation.
Ready to go.
It's like I'm here for it.
I didn't say your eyebrows were big. I just said every time you said the words tough conversation, they just looked so intense.
If you are not, this is a public message. If you're not talking with both your mouth and your eyebrows, you're missing half.
I can't anymore because my forehead's so wrinkly. Like if I do that, it's like a doggone accordion.
Oh my goodness.
So, but for so many people out there, like tough conversations, it just cripples us in fear. We really do. So what makes a tough conversation one of those that is tough conversation? Because I think a lot of us, we view conversations that maybe they're tough, they're supposed to happen, they should happen, but we disregard them. We let them go. We just are too afraid. So first, let's identify. So for people listening, maybe they think they're trying to tell themselves it's not a conversation that needs to happen. This isn't a crucial or tough conversation. It's just something we'll cover eventually. They're telling themselves it's not.
Yeah.
So maybe we can help identify, like, actually, you're misdiagnosing it. That is a tough conversation.
Yeah.
I like to think about it kind of simply. Like one of the things we've taught our, LCBC, if people have been around LCBC for a little bit, we've kind of talked about as a church the reality that happens in every single relationship at some point. It really doesn't matter if it's a family dynamic, work relationship, neighbors, whatever. It's the gap between expectations and reality. So there's always going to be, if you're in a human relationship, there will be a moment where there's at some point there's a gap between expectations, what you thought was going to happen, and reality of what happened. I think that that's to be expected. That's normal. But I think that's where typically the need for a conversation sort of emerges. Or you got to, if it's truly an issue, like I guess you can just eat that and kind of go, okay, it's not really that big of a deal. But if it keeps happening, that's usually it. And it can be really, really simple things. It could be really big things. Tough conversations are, I need to talk to my husband about this thing that he keeps doing that I feel like is really kind of cutting the legs out from under me. A tough conversation is I need to talk to my kids about sex, and I don't know how to do that, and I know that they're going to be resistant, but I need to, my son's 13, we got to talk about this. My son's 11, we probably need to talk about this. A tough conversation is the person at work continues to drop the ball on what they said they were going to do, and I know I need to say something about that, but I'm scared to do it. So it's those things that tend to erupt in the middle of the gap between expectations and reality. Yeah. That we know that's why I said, I think your definition actually was a really good one. The conversations you know you need to have and just don't want to.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of all know what that feels like.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's like when you start telling yourself a story that might not be true. Like, I think it's when opinions just differ, and like you have to like sort that out. And so, yeah, I think that you know when you're like you guys have been saying, like you need to have it, but
Yeah.
there's something in your gut that's like, oh, this is gonna suck.
That's
and-
that's it. That's in a
And the
nutshell.
reason why it will is because there's usually two things that are under the surface. And the first is emotions. In those kinds of conversations, emotions are going to be prevalent, and then the other is the stakes feel pretty high. And so the stakes being high, like that goes to the stakes are high in my marriage. So it's a high stakes conversation. The stakes are high with my relationship with my kids. The stakes are high in my working relationship.
Yeah.
But then there's also emotions that it could be a highly charged emotionally conversation. So the higher those two things go, the more anxiety we tend to feel about diving into those things, which is why I think sometimes we just avoid them altogether.
Yeah.
I think you hit on something for me, which is I think I can identify tough conversations that I need to have when I have them, when I want to have them with everyone else but that person.
Oh, that's good. That's usually an indicator,
Yeah.
like
That this is a conversation I need to have with this person, because if it's something that I can forget and I'm never having it, but when I'm having the conversation with this person over and over in my head with my spouse, with my therapist, with my friends, with the lady on the bus, like when I'm having these conversations that I should be having with them, but I'm having them with everyone else.
Yeah.
It's a tough conversation.
a friend of mine led a large organization, and he said that, I love this. He said that he counted as a rule that if he ever talked to his wife twice about something that, like a gripe about the board, he knew that was his indicator light he has to talk to the board. That was like the cue. If he ever brought it up more than the second time. If it was one time, it's like, it might just been a bad day.
Yeah.
But the second time, he's like, I got to talk to the board about it.
Yeah.
So it's those little, but I think that's exactly kind of what you're saying is sometimes just paying attention to those little indicator lights going, oh boy, I probably need to have this. I don't think we don't know when we need to have them as much as we just don't do it.
Yeah.
I think we tend to know I should say something.
I just don't know how.
I think sometimes we don't have the tools. Yep.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we don't have the courage.
And we're going to talk about the tools. But we as Christians, so one of the first things that we as Christians can do is sometimes we use our faith and forgiveness as a way of getting out of jail free. So a good example of this is sometimes we know the conversation, oh, this is going to be a terrible conversation, I don't want to have it. And then we start to go like, I'm just going to forgive them. I'm going to show grace. We use the Christian words. I'm going to be the bigger person. I'm going to forgive them. I'm going to do whatever. We should be having the conversation, but why is the crucial or tough conversation have to happen as Christians? Why can't we just forgive those people and forget about it? Or maybe that is a way to handle it.
Or I think sometimes actually on the flip side too, when you're in the conversation, the other person is surprised that you're not just giving grace and like you're also giving truth. Like one of the things I think we talk a lot about is it's both and, like truth and grace can coexist and likely need to continue to move the relationship forward, the project forward, the whatever, fill in the blank on like what you're talking about
really
in the tough conversation is both and. Like you don't have to choose one or the other. Both can be present when they're well articulated and like clear.
So you're saying if you love someone enough to forgive them, love them enough to be candid with them.
Yeah.
Like candor and forgiveness are both gifts.
Yeah.
And we have a tendency to be a little quicker to forgive, but to be candid with truth, that's
and also
harder.
leave room for them to offer perspective. Because you also like might have the truth and the grace.
That's true.
But like if we're in a crucial conversation, like I also need to trust that you have truth and grace that also might be applicable that needs to be shared.
That's very challenging, actually, for me. I'm literally coming here from being with my counselor. So I see a counselor once a month. And if you don't, you're missing out. So there's my plug. Anyways, so I've got to have a crucial conversation. And I'm real fired up about it. Like I can't wait. I'm excited. and
you and I have very different feelings.
Well, I'm not about everyone.
But
this one I am because I'm just mad. And that's not by the way, I'm not saying this is good.
You can be honest with me.
Yeah. So anyways, I was going to ask. What do you,
Interestingly enough, we have a meeting after this.
Side note, are we still on for an hour from now? No, it's no one at the table. But what were we just talking about? I can't remember what
You're
we were just talking
really excited to have a crucial
Yeah, but it was
conversation
something that you were
that like
talking
you
about.
have to also let
Oh,
the other
yeah.
perspective come into play.
That was her challenge to me.
Mm.
And that was it was a significant challenge. And it was very actually insightful is she was saying, as you go into this conversation, just remember, y'all might agree on more things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can let them have opportunity to state what they feel about the thing, you may find actually, oh, I was going in with like guns loaded for this, and yet, oh, we actually agree on the fundamentals.
Yeah.
It's the expression of this particular thing that
Totally.
like we might not be aligned on.
Mhm.
So, anyways, that is very, very. I think that's really insightful, and I think that's a great challenge. Is to take time and listen. Chad, going back to your original question, though, you were kind of saying Christians have to get this right because fundamentally, following Jesus changes and affects and lives itself out and expresses itself in the way we treat other people. That's kind of the bottom line, big idea. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Foundation to all the conversation we're having today.
Mm-hmm.
So for followers of Jesus, we take these kinds of things seriously because we want to not only love God, we want to follow Jesus. What he said in Matthew 22 is the most important commandment, to love God, but also to love our neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to love our neighbor, number one, if we're lying to them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not having conversations that
Yeah.
we know we need to.
Yep.
Or number two, we are having them and we're doing it in a way that's dishonoring and disrespectful and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
that's why it's actually fundamental to being a follower of Jesus to reflect on and think about how we have tough conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm trying to say earlier is it's going to happen. The nature of human relationships is there will be gaps in expectations and reality.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's really important to point out. We said this a lot to our church in beginning, the first series that we did in this year. If you haven't listened to it, you need to go back and listen to it, how to, getting it right with the people who matter most. It's a great series, but we talked about this a lot because partly what I want to do is just normalize this for our people. In other words, if there's people who've been married 2 years and they're really discouraged because they're like, man, there's a huge gap between expectations and reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to tell them, you're normal.
Yeah.
It's okay. Your marriage is not bad because because you have a gap between expectation and reality. Oh man, I don't know if I can work here anymore. I've been here for 6 months. It's like, no. It doesn't mean you need to leave.
Mm-hmm.
It might mean you need to have some conversations, but that gap, it will follow you anywhere.
Totally.
And that's kind of like the point. So that's going to happen. And if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're not a follower of Jesus, have it however you want. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you don't really get a choice in what that means to follow him. And he tells us you're going to, Romans 12:10 says to honor one another above yourself. So we need to do it in a way that's honoring. John 17, Jesus prays for unity, which is kind of a crazy thought. He prays for the church. He prays for anyone who's going to follow him after his death, burial, and resurrection. He prays for the church.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. Like anybody who follows Jesus, he had us in mind. And the number one thing he prays is unity. Would they be one as we are one? How do you have tough conversations in a way that are divisive and still work for unity?
Right.
So my point is, I'm just trying to give you like
or
a
withhold
theological
from one another that actually isn't helping move
helping
towards
the other person.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So my question is, what is the fear then? What is, because this is, I think everyone listening is going to agree in principle.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think they're going to nod their heads and they're going to go, I get that. I
Mhm.
get that. I get that Jesus wants me to do it. I get that I should do it. I get that it's the conversation I should be having. But I think a lot of people are stopped in their tracks and they maybe can't even articulate what's stopping them. So what does stop us from experiencing the freedom of having a tough conversation with the right person that needs to hear it? What stops us? What is crippling us? And maybe let's stare it in the eyes, stare it down, maybe identify it, and then let's get rid of it.
Yeah. I think it's all the what ifs. Like, because then you find yourself in that conversation and it's all of the bad outcomes that we naturally gravitate towards first, right?
Yep.
What if this conversation ends our marriage?
Yeah,
What if
yeah.
this conversation, my kids never want to speak to me again? I mean, those are like big, right?
Mhm.
What if it's, hey, I don't get to do that project at work anymore? So it could be small scale, right? But it's funny, like I think it's fear of all of the what ifs that come with
I think there's a
the
lot
potential.
I think there's a lot of fear. I think that's great. I also think one reason we don't know how. Like, we
Yeah.
truly don't have the tools. Like, most people have never seen this modeled well. All they've seen is blow-ups and explosions and
Mhm.
yeah buts and all that kind of stuff. So, we talked about honor and unity a moment ago. Most people have not seen those done in emotionally healthy ways.
Yeah.
And so don't have a framework. So it's
Mhm.
like we don't even know how to get into those things other than I'm just going to go tell them a piece of my mind or something.
Right.
But that's not what we're talking. That's not a tough conversation.
Mhm.
Right.
So I think that's part of it as well. I mean, the things that keep me from it is I think my emotional tank is empty. That's one reason I don't.
Mhm.
I just don't have that energy.
Yeah.
Like I know I need to go talk. I know I need to go do this or that. And sometimes
Mhm.
I'm just tapped out.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying to think about personally why have I
Yeah.
avoided them at times.
Life moves fast. Like I
Life
think
moves
there's some of
fast.
that too.
Yep. And then sometimes you need to go have it, kind of delay it, and then life moves on. And then you're like, too late now to bring it up.
Yeah.
That happens.
That-
Mhm.
And sometimes it is. So those are things that kept me, and then probably just sometimes it's a little bit of the who am I to say
Mhm.
this. I
Yes.
think that
Mhm.
sometimes
There's
plays
a
into it.
doubt that, like,
Yep.
like
I don't want to be judgy. I don't know. I'm trying to think
Yeah.
of like
Mhm.
things that maybe language we might couch it in.
I think sometimes the fear of the unknown allows us to stay in the status quo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the like I know I'm uncomfortable here, but if I open that door,
Mhm.
I can't close it.
Yeah.
Once I tell them I see this, once I tell them I'm worried about this, once I
Mhm.
tell my husband I'm worried about his third drink, once I
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
my mom that I'm worried about the codependency, or once I
Mhm.
say it, you can't get it back. You can't
Mhm.
go back to status quo.
Totally. Totally.
And so some of us are like, I don't think I'd
Mhm.
rather have the peace of the moment and the status quo of the moment over what could be behind that door.
Mhm.
Let dead dogs lie. I
Yes.
think is yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I mean, look, there's a place for that. There actually is a place for that. I think that there's a place sometimes for, is that really worth dredging up? It's not if it's not taking up occupying mental space for you or in your heart.
Mhm.
But if it still is, then you're still using your energy. Do you
Mhm.
see it? But in a very unproductive way.
Yeah.
So in other words, if I could say, let dead dogs lie, but then I'm on my phone with my mom talking about my brother who's doing, and it's like, I'm just going to let dead, it's like, but I'm not. I'm
Right.
just talking to my mom about it,
Mhm.
or whatever. So that's what I'm saying is the unhealthiness right there is like, you're still doing it.
Right.
Sometimes the Bible says, I think it's Colossians says to make allowance for each other's faults. I
Mhm.
love that. I love that statement in the New Testament because I love that because it's so humanizing. It's kind of like, look, people are people.
Mhm.
Sometimes you do dumb things. Sometimes they just shrink your sweater.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you got to go have to make a big? No, they shrunk the sweater.
Yeah.
It's like make allowance for that. Like you don't even have to bring it up.
Right.
But if it's the things that keep coming up. It's the things that you can't let. Then it's like
Mhm.
that's your sign of like you need to go talk about this.
Yeah. And I think it's too when your perspective about the other person starts to change.
Yeah. Oh, they never respect my sweaters.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, that's like part of the story. But then
Mhm.
also it's changing how you treat them or the opportunities like that you're giving them or you know what I
Mhm,
mean? Like,
mhm.
and I think too, then that gets in the way. That's getting in the way of the relationship moving forward
Yeah.
in unproductive ways.
I actually think a lot of families deal with this. Like, I think a lot of families deal with the fact that if you stay in the status quo, eventually it becomes quicksand.
Mm.
Like, it feels safe today, but I think where you guys are started to shift was like, but you can't stay there because if you keep having the conversations in your head and with other people,
Mhm.
the relationship you're trying to hold on to will actually dissolve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to eat its way from the inside out, whether you have the conversation or not.
Mhm.
In actuality, sometimes ripping off the bandage is the
Mm.
greatest thing you can do for healing.
Mhm.
It's like when I like this illustration. I don't know why, but it's like when we have a kid that has a wound, and they don't want to take their hand off the scratch or the cut or
Mm.
whatever. They don't want to take their hand off to look at it because then they got to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But in actuality, it's like, hey, when we take our hand off and actually look at it, we can actually heal it. We can actually take a look at it. If you just keep hiding it, it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
It's going to not get better.
I love that. And there's one other thing that struck me as you were sharing that of a reason we don't sometimes. I actually think this is a good one. Like this is a probably valid reason. Because the other person's a fool, and I mean that in the biblical sense, like the proverbial sense.
Yeah, yeah.
The Proverbs over and over and over again in the Old Testament say a fool is someone who won't listen.
Mm-hmm.
And we always tell our kids, let people tell you who they are and believe them. So if you can
I like
watch
that.
you can watch people, and if you see that they get a piece of feedback in a team meeting and they're just deflecting, it's like, why would you feel comfortable for you to bring it up?
Right.
They're fools. So don't waste your time on that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I guess we'll need to nuance that a little bit. But
Yeah.
I do think that's real. And I think that's another reason some of us don't, because it's like we've seen how they react.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the onus as a Christian, again, not a Christian, you can ignore this, but if you're following Jesus, is to make yourself approachable.
Mm-hmm.
I want Jenny to feel, I want you guys, team members here, I want the church, I want people, friends to be able to come to me and tell me if there's something. But I have a responsibility in that too,
Mm-hmm.
which is to be open.
Yeah.
And to be approachable.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes people having the conversations are they themselves fools. Because just because you're the confident one, just because you're the
Exactly. Yeah.
facilitator or the starter of the conversation doesn't make you right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's
Just because you're the starter of the conversation doesn't give you the superiority. Sometimes
Totally.
I've started conversations and it's only after I'm halfway through that I'm like, oh, I'm the wrong one. Shoot.
Yes.
It's almost always with my wife too, by the way.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh, I started this trying to teach you something, but I realized that
Yeah.
I need to be taught.
Well, because sometimes I think it's also like a false assumption that the loudest or most direct people are the best at crucial conversations.
Mm.
Yes.
So like I also think there's a posture too where like you might be afraid, and like I know like I've experienced this where like I've been afraid to wade into the conversation because I can't match the tone or direct or the
Mhm.
like authoritativeness of
Yeah.
potentially like the conversation that like I'm about to get into. And it's interesting because I don't know, hearing you guys talk, it also just the like gentle spirit and like the approachability, right? So it's like, do we also have like ears to hear and be reshaped in our thinking based on someone introducing something new? And so like, I know the content even from today, Crucial Conversations, the book is a great resource to talk about how to do this well. And one of the things they talk about is like that dialogue where it's like, we really can say, cool, these are like my facts. That doesn't mean they're the facts. Then what are your facts? And now let's actually talk about, hey, we've both entered like the dialogue and like they call it the pool of shared meaning, right?
Mhm.
Where it's just like, now we have a more productive place to start from versus me just deciding, hey, I have something to tell you. And then you have to hear it.
I think that's what Karen, my counselor, was. I think that's exactly what she was pushing on today.
Yeah.
You're just kind of thinking about, I have something to share with
Right.
you. You
It's
know
like,
what I
well,
mean?
that's great, but they
Yeah.
probably have something to share too.
Yeah.
And
Which
that's what I
don't
think can
care
be.
about.
I
you
think
know what I mean?
that's
Like you got to
hard.
get through that. You
Right.
got to say, I don't care about it, but
Yeah.
I need to care about it. So
'Cause what's
I'll
that-
change my perspective.
Yeah, because what's at stake if we don't jump into them?
Yeah.
I mean, even myself, like I have seen, then you work out of it. You don't work
Mhm.
through it. And so like even then you will always live in that gap, or that gap will follow you between expectations and reality because you didn't deal with the thing.
with it.
And you'll just jump into another relationship or conversation, and like that gap will still keep following you because you haven't figured out how to work through it. We just keep opting to work out of it.
And I think the last thing I would offer, and it's a simple thing, don't underestimate how good things can become on the
Mhm.
other side of candor and honesty.
Totally.
Well, that's a great point. I was going to say this. I love that you brought that up. Les Parrott, relationship expert, Les and Leslie Parrott, they say at one point there's a quote that they say, conflict is the price we pay for deepening intimacy. So this is exactly what you're getting at, Chad. Deepening intimacy tends to come on the other side of a conflict you worked through
Mhm.
with someone. And the closer you get with someone, the more inevitable conflict will be.
Mhm.
You have two people, rubbing up against each other, right? And there will be conflict at times. So expect it and dive into it,
Mhm.
and you might find there's actually more intimacy on the other side because of the shared meaning,
Mhm.
because of I felt heard, and It's
Good.
amazing how often I'll get into. I didn't really need to be right. I didn't really need to. I mean, I want to,
Mhm.
but it's amazing how many times I'll get into something. It's like, okay, I was respected,
Yeah.
and my perspective was heard, and it's
Mhm.
like we don't disagree. There's nothing that changed.
Yeah.
After the conversation, but we're closer.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that like you're bringing value to the table,
Yeah.
and that you felt valued like as a contributor, as a partner, as a
Yeah.
parent, like, you know what I mean?
The hard part with that, the Les and Leslie Parrott quote though, is that's assuming two relatively emotionally, none of us are
Mhm.
perfectly emotionally healthy, but relatively emotionally healthy, self-aware people.
Mhm.
And that's why I was trying to draw a distinction earlier. I don't want to set people up to go, well, if I just go have the conversation with someone who's proven themselves to be antagonistic and doesn't want to ever hear from, I don't know if there'll be deepening intimacy on the other side of that. But if it's two people who are open to truth, who are willing to, like, there usually is
Mhm.
deepening intimacy
Yeah.
on the other side of that.
And that you can't know if someone's a fool until you've had a couple of these conversations.
Right.
So you can't just assume. You can't go, well, oh good, that's my get out of jail free card.
Mhm.
They're a fool. They're not going to
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah.
If you've never had it, you don't know. And you don't know what God's going to do in their heart. You don't know
Yeah.
what the Holy Spirit could do in that situation. And
Mhm.
so
Well, yeah, and go ahead, join it.
Well, I was gonna say, and I think there are times too where like, I don't know that I would. Well, I hope Kevin wouldn't qualify me this way. In conversations for us that have been difficult, I don't think either of us, either in some of those situations, were even foolish. We didn't know how to navigate it. So then I also think sometimes there is honesty where it's like, hey, why do we keep finding ourselves in this same crucial conversation? How can we go get help from someone else to see a different perspective? Because
see,
we're
that's the
also
definition
so
of a
stuck.
wise- But stuck's not foolish. Stuck is, because that's actually the definition of wisdom, is to go, we need help.
Yeah.
Because a wise person goes,
Thanks for reframing that for me.
well, it is. It truly is. A wise person is open to truth,
Yeah.
biblically speaking, proverbially in the Proverbs. So what you're saying is there's truth that we don't have right now that's keeping us set, that we need to be open.
Yeah.
So,
Because you guys mentioned the sweater thing. I mean,
what was
early in marriage,
Oh, yeah, that
we
was
had a
real.
lot of arguments about
Sweater
laundry,
shrinking.
right? And so I mean,
That's
guys,
funny.
it sounds ridiculous,
No.
but there was a thing under the thing
Oh,
moment.
yeah.
And anyway,
the
so
nugget. We always talk about the
yeah.
nugget. It's like, okay, clearly we're fighting about something that
nugget.
that is not.
Yes.
What's
And-
the nugget of the conversation we
Yeah.
should be talking about?
Yeah. And so anyway, our counselor helped us realize like, hey, it's this thing, not this thing, right?
Yeah.
And so there are still times actually, every once in a while, a piece of laundry will get messed up. Kevin does laundry. He does a great job. There are times where like a piece of laundry goes like awry, and it's like, I need to just bite my tongue because we've
Yeah.
decided I don't want to do all of the laundry. Kevin graciously does that chore in our house, so then I don't get to
You
talk
live with
about
that.
it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so anyway,
good.
the make allowance, like it is funny
Yeah.
just when you think about that, because then you're operating out of a healthier place where it's just like, oh, Kevin's out to get my laundry or whatever. It's like, no, that's not
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
So that's like the story you tell yourself.
Now we get to the good part. We get to talk about how to have this conversation. Now, before we get into that, I'm going to pause and I'm going to tell everyone about something exciting that's coming up. Hey, don't worry. We'll be right back to our episode in just a moment. But if you love the Live Change podcast, we're excited to let you know we just launched a brand new email where we're sending out exclusive bonus content like group discussion guides. Also, it's the best way to make sure you never miss an episode of the Live Change podcast. Plus, you'll be the first one to know when a new one drops. How do you get this? Well, you just have to sign up now at the link in the description or on the show notes. And hey, while you're there, do me a favor. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. That helps us make sure that the content from the Live Change podcast gets out to a whole bunch of new people. So, all right, let's get back to our episode. So now let's talk about how do we shift? Like, how do we actually start to have the conversation? How do we prepare ourselves for it? How do we enter into it? How do we know it's going well and when it's going awry? Let's talk about that. So my first question is, how do we shift our mindset getting ready for the conversation? What do you think the mindset we need to get ready to have this conversation?
I'm interested actually in using one verse as a framework. And let's use 2 Timothy 1:7 as a framework for this whole thing. And be interested in, we haven't talked about this ahead of time, and so I'm kind of working this out with you guys. But I think
Mhm.
it's actually interesting how this talks out. So 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline." All right, let's apply that truth to how we approach a tough conversation. The first would be, He hasn't given us a spirit of fear and timidity. We're gonna pray for courage.
Mhm.
We're gonna need courage.
Yeah.
Courage to what? To tell the truth, right? And so He hasn't given you. I would remind everybody, okay, if you're feeling afraid about a conversation, that's definitely not. God doesn't give us a spirit of fear and timidity. So I would say, I mean, I've gone into so many conversations that could have been tough or whatever, and just prayed about it
Mhm.
and just said, hey. There was actually a conversation. It was really highly amped. This was probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it was amped coming into it.
Mm.
And the first, what would you say, the first 10 seconds of kind of actually meeting each other, it was obviously charged in the air.
Mhm.
And sat down, and the first thing, and Jenny actually, she's so wise, much wiser than I am, but I was telling her about it that morning she's like, well, just start by praying. That thought didn't occur to me until Jenny, I'm not kidding.
Thank you, Pastor Mitchell.
Yeah. So I know. But I did that. We sat down, and it changed the atmosphere.
Mhm.
Yes, it did.
It changed the atmosphere. And I don't
Yes,
mean you
it
have to
did.
do
Was
that.
it you?
It did make it sound like
Yeah.
I was the one.
It wasn't Chad.
I'm just guaranteeing that it did.
Yeah. That's
That
funny.
was like one of those, like
Yeah.
a holy, like, yes.
I remember how when
yes
you
and
prayed.
amen. Yeah.
You remember that, Chad? Saying, you're not gonna. That doesn't mean I'm not saying pray in every conversation with the person. That's not what I'm saying. Some
Yeah.
don't lend themselves to that. I mean, you can pray before going into it, though.
Yeah.
And so that's what he says. Not given a spirit of prayer, fear and timidity. So let's pray for that. But of power. Okay. What's power? Power is the ability to strongly, in this context, right? We apply it to this, to be strong in clarifying and saying what your position is, or what truth is, or what you need to say. He's going to give you the power you need to be clear and to say these things, but also of love. So we're going to do that. We're going to use this as a framework. We're going to go, hey, I don't want anything I say in this conversation to be unloving. So we're not going to get into personal attacks. I'm not going to bring up history. That's not loving. I'm not going to say always and never. That's not loving, and it's not true. And of self-discipline. So self-discipline is the ability to go, I know what I'm here to talk about.
Mhm.
I want to talk about these things. And I'm going to stay on course with this.
Yeah.
That's why whenever I go into a tough conversation, I always have an outline already, what I'm going to talk about. And it's usually, I try to get it down like 2 or 3 things to keep us there, because I know how quick they can go sideways, and it becomes about something that's really not the thing.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the self-discipline. So it's interesting to think about, I think if you're praying about it, you're being courageous enough to say it.
Mhm.
You are doing it in a spirit of love, and you're staying disciplined to stay the course on what's true and not divert and all that. You're setting yourself up for a productive conversation. Doesn't mean it's going to fix everything, but a productive conversation, at least a God-honoring conversation.
Yeah, I love that.
If you need to pause, like if you're listening to this and you need to pause and just start working on that right now, like look at that passage and work through that, and then come back to this, like full permission, because that, I think, was a critical piece to start. Like, I think it starts with our own heart. It's bathed in the scripture. It's bathed in God's promises, and it's allowing God to be the authority in the conversation, not you. And I think that's huge.
Yeah.
We also talk about not going, again, we've tried to teach our church this, that when we go into tough conversations, to be careful of what your objective is. Every relationship's going to have some fights, right? Fighting is not bad. It's how you fight that determines whether the fight is bad or good. So we talk about, we want to fight for resolution, not to fight to win. And when you fight to win, relationships lose. And we know what that feels like, because we've all been on the other side, where the other person, we know you're just fighting to beat me. You're just trying to tell me I'm wrong. You're trying to make your point. Who would respond well to that?
Right.
And as a Christian, that's not honoring and respectful and loving. So we're going to fight for we're going to fight to find resolution, right? We're going to fight means we're going to have to tell the truth and listen to each other, but it's to get to a place of again, it doesn't need to be agreement on everything, but
Right.
it's I've been heard and I've heard you,
Yeah.
and we're clear on that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, you can disagree but still be committed,
Totally.
right? And
Yes.
like that is I mean, that is hard, right? I mean, I know it says like it sounds easy, right? But you can also leave a crucial conversation and you might not agree, but you can still commit to that you want what's best for the relationship or the thing or you know what I mean?
I
Um
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, this is certainly not, um, limited to young, like, 20-somethings, but I see this all the time in 20-somethings that I talk to, is this disconnect between being their authentic self
mm.
in this sense of, like, unless like, what would you say? I can be committed.
You
How did
can
you s
disagree,
You can
but you
disagree.
can leave committed, like
Yes,
still committed.
like, if that I stay in a relationship where it's like, we're not aligned, it's like, yeah, that's not being authentic, that's just
Mhm.
being faithful.
Yeah.
So, there are it's kinda that lie of, like, that we believe sometimes, like, unless I've said everything that I need to say and da 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 da, like, I'm not being
Mhm.
authentic, I'm not being whatever. We do this with God sometimes too. It's like, I don't really feel like reading the scriptures. I don't really feel like praying, and so I'm not gonna do it because that wouldn't be authentic. It's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean that's not authentic? That's just called being in a relationship. That's just called being faithful.
Yeah.
That's called being committed.
Right.
So, you don't need to feel something to do it.
Mhm. Well,
Do it because it's right.
yeah. And 20 somethings aside, I mean, all you have to do is open social media.
Well, yeah.
Ooh.
You know what I mean? And like some of that too
Yeah.
is just like the space for you know, I think a moment ago we were talking about even like how to prepare. Some
Yeah.
of it too is like then using that framework like in the right context at the right time. And so like jumping over to Facebook to have a crucial conversation in the comments, like probably not super helpful
I'm
or
going to argue.
productive.
I'm going to go out on a limb here. No crucial conversation can happen in the comment section of social media.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna toss it. I think I'm safe. I think I'm safe in
Yeah.
saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No crucial conversation will happen in Facebook comment section.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
And so even back to like, I think we've been using the word honor even. So then even to honor that space and honor that relationship, like I would also say, just make sure we're having the right conversations with the right people at the right time.
Mhm.
Where you are well prepared, right? Like life moves fast, right? But it's not helpful if I just like grab you in the hallway and it's like, hey, we're gonna have a crucial conversation right now, too, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I think also honoring to the other person to make sure that like we're preparing well, we're preparing our hearts well, but also that we're leaving space for them to feel comfortable and confident about jumping
Yeah.
into that conversation.
That is a great segue, Joanna, because I think we started with like step one. How do you know you need to have a conversation? Step two is all about how to ready ourselves for that conversation. And I think that's part of readying yourself for a conversation. Before we get to the day of, let's talk about how do we talk to the person about the conversation? How do we set that conversation up best? We don't. So you just said, let's not surprise them. Let's not. It shouldn't be like one of those interventions where it's like, they say, oh, I didn't know I was walking into this. That can feel a little unsafe. So how do you ready the conversation with the other person? What's a safe place to do it? How do you ready them so they feel emotionally safe? Or is that even important? So how do you ready for the day of?
I think sometimes the discipline is not having it when we're in the moment because my emotions are just
Yeah.
highly
Step
charged.
one,
And so
don't
I
be
think,
emotional.
yeah,
Yep.
I think it's sometimes just giving a little bit of space so that you're not reacting and you're more responding and not reacting. So, but I also don't feel like I need to tell, like, let's just stay
Yeah.
with the kids. I don't feel like I need to tell my kids, hey, let's talk tomorrow at this time about this thing, you know? And it all depends on like what the urgency of the thing. I mean,
Right.
like the matter. So
Totally.
if if I discovered something on a phone or something like that, I'm probably not going to wait 4 weeks
Yep.
to talk about that.
Yeah, some things are just going to naturally be more immediate.
You got to talk
Almost
about
like that idea of like, hey, when you see something, you got to say something.
Yeah, yeah.
Because waiting is also potentially more harmful than like
Yeah.
just calling a timeout. I think too, some of that comes down to potentially how well you know the person.
Mm.
And so like I know even for between Kevin and I, it is more helpful to him if it's like, hey, there's something that's been on my mind. Like, can we grab time tonight and talk through that? And he's learned that I'm not telling him that, so he has to start worrying about it. But then he knows, cool, I need to plan on being engaged and like be able to, like I think we've used the word even on the podcast, like to be emotionally available to like step into a conversation, right? But yeah, I would agree. Like there are times even with the kids where it's like, hey, time out. Like, can we talk about like what just happened? Or even like at work where there are some people they're wiring more than other people that you may work with. And so to honor them and meet them in a place that's helpful to them is great, but totally get that contextually sometimes you just might not have the time or know that to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think just allowing yourself the adequate amount of time, choosing it sounds so silly and practical, and everyone listening is going to say, no kidding, Chad, but I do think that not springing it in an inopportune time.
Yeah.
Just because you happen to be in the break room with your coworker and you two happen to be alone, that doesn't make that the best time.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I do think there's something practical of making it a place where if this person doesn't feel ready to have this conversation, they don't have to feel like it's sprung on them. So
Yep.
I think making sure, again, let's use the 2 Timothy passage, doing it in love and self-discipline.
Yeah.
Love and self-discipline says, how can I love you by choosing a place that you're going to feel safe, not embarrassed, not seen by other people. Don't do it at Christmas dinner. That's not a place that's not going to be loving. That's not going to be the most loving place to have that conversation.
Yeah. I'm curious your guys' perspective. Like what happens when we didn't get to prepare? We've also all found ourselves in situations where even playing that verse out, where it's like very real time in front of you, or you've hopped into a conversation that has then turned crucial.
Well, I think then our guidepost is simply the love your neighbor as yourself and honor the Romans, to honor, because what Paul's doing in that Romans passage is playing that. He's essentially playing that out. The love your neighbor as yourself. This is what that looks like, right? One of those expressions of that is to honor above your own interests, right? So all that to say, to me, then you're guiding, because that happens, by the way.
Yeah.
You get thrown into tough
Yes.
conversations that you weren't into. Sometimes it's thrown onto you, and you realize, oh, this is a lot.
Well, here we go.
Yeah. But at that point, us living as followers of Jesus doesn't stop. It's not like we shelf that. So our fundamental lens through which we do that is, okay, I can still love and honor. So I need to figure out how to respond to this in a loving and honoring way.
Yeah.
So and telling the truth.
Yeah. And I think sometimes in those moments, you have to check your own motivations and like your next move too. Because I think it's also just really easy. It could be really easy then to just jump in full force and match where the other person's at. Sometimes I think there is permission. Well, not sometimes. Like there is also permission to be like, cool, we need to call a timeout. Like I actually don't want to do anything to further hurt this relationship.
Yes.
And so sometimes I think too, it's the self-discipline comes into play.
That's true.
Where you might need to be the more aware one in the conversation to be like, hold on, this is no longer productive. We're not having the right conversation. I'm actually like going to call pause. Let's reconvene like when we're able to have our heads on straight.
How do you know when that happens? So how do you know when a conversation is going sideways? So even if you've prepared, how do you know when it's like, oh, okay, this just... Whoops.
Well, I would say I know, like, even maybe to borrow your words, like when I want to fight to win, where it's like, oh, we're going to throw down. Okay, cool. I can do that. And then
so
it's
if
like,
you see in the break room, Joanna throwing up the gloves, taking out her earrings.
We were in a meeting the other day, and Joanna gave me a look that I think you were close to that at one point.
Oh, no.
Okay.
We'll talk. Maybe that's what we're talking about later today.
No.
So like, yeah, like I think that too is like when you start to feel maybe, I don't want to say out of control, because I think that might be too dramatic, but when you don't feel as control of your own emotions or posture, at least for me, that can be like a yellow flag where it's like, hang on,
Which
don't
sometimes
talk right now.
well, that's very self-aware if you're able to do that. And then also the other sign, I think sometimes it's like we're talking about the same thing over and over again. So it's like we just keep cycling back to the same thing. It's not productive anymore.
Yep.
So, and it's usually not even about the thing.
Yep.
So, I mean, like we talked about, or the nugget. You know what I mean?
So I heard Joanna say that when emotions are starting to spike and I'm starting to want to win, which also probably looks like when I want to hurt the person. You know what I
Like
mean?
That's,
Like
that's
yeah,
the
like
look.
yeah,
That's the look I
you know
got.
what I mean? Like it's not.
I gotta know what we were talking
And I
about. We'll
don't
talk
even
later.
mean physically hurt the person. I mean like I want them to feel.
You want them to feel smaller. You
Yeah,
want them to feel, yeah.
Yeah.
yes,
Well, when
I'm,
you want to win.
You want to
yeah.
win.
Yeah.
I'm gonna win my point.
And and you had said that you want
You just keep cycling back to the same
cycling
thing.
back,
Like
yeah.
we're not getting anywhere with this.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
another great one. I think when things get personal, I
Yeah.
think when the conversation goes to you always, when the
Mhm.
conversation goes to I knew you'd do this, I knew you'd
Oof,
say
yeah.
this.
You
That's
get
when
historical.
this is
Yeah.
like, okay, at this point, you're
Mhm.
probably not going to see your way out of the woods, but you're going to get deeper and deeper and get more lost. And
Yeah.
you're going to have a crucial conversation about your crucial conversation. And I've had that. I've
Mhm.
had where what started out as a conversation here, because of an improper handling of the disagreement,
Mhm.
it went deeper.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And now it's like, crap.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, we shouldn't have had that conversation. It was unchecked. And now we have to have a whole different kind of conversation. So that's
Yeah.
another. So I think those are three really good takeaways of when you see that happening, but how do you get out? What's the ripcord? How do you get out of that conversation where it's like, you see some of these things happening? How do
Mhm.
you do that? It's like, how do you pull the parachute?
I think sometimes just being able to call it out, where it's like, hey, this conversation does not feel like we were talking about what we were, or this doesn't feel any like productive any longer, or I actually care too much about our relationship. I think we need to like hit pause.
Yeah.
And then like let's figure out the right time to resume or how to move forward.
That's good.
I think that's great. I would say when I'm in my healthiest seasons, I'm able to say in this one, hey, I feel really frustrated right now and
Mm.
don't think this is like I'm just able to say that.
Yeah.
And this isn't helpful.
Mhm.
And just to say, or I feel really attacked. So there, so much of what we're talking about, the key to all of this is emotional and spiritual maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more spiritually mature you are, I believe, the more emotionally mature you get. And the more emotionally mature, the more secure you are to have these kinds of conversations. Because you know that like
Your worth isn't
your
at
worth's
stake.
not at stake. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like that's and I've been in seasons of I've had seasons where I felt very, very healthy
Mm-hmm.
emotionally and spiritually. I've had seasons where I felt very unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen the difference in how I relate to people in those seasons. And it's a marked difference.
Yeah.
And even how you have tough conversations.
I
Yeah.
like that. It's almost like you're telling me, like, Chad, don't go into that conversation alone. Make sure God's with you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
You should have your relationship with God. There should be nothing between you and God
Mm-hmm.
before you start tackling what's between you and that person.
Yeah, and I think that's the praying before you go into those things, and saying, "Hey God, I need your. First of all, I just need to know I'm your son right now. I need to know
Yeah.
I'm your daughter right now. So just
Mhm.
remind me of my worth in you."
Mm-hmm.
And Tim Keller says, I love what he says about this. He says that a spiritual maturity can be marked by how crushed you get by someone's criticism. And so, if kind of break that down for a second, it's like the level of someone's criticism of you that crushes you sometimes is an indicator, like, oh man, my worth's not in Christ right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find validation
Wow.
from this person.
Mm-hmm.
So to the level that
That's
someone
good.
can crush you with their critique,
Mm-hmm.
that's not shaming you. It's more just saying, just pay attention to that because it
Mhm.
might mean it's time to come back to your source.
Boy, that's good because like I'll write things for LCBC. Like I'll
Mhm.
write an article, a Bible reading plan, podcast. And when I give that to someone like Joanne and go like, "Hey, can you look at this?" and she comes back with like, "Hey, here's A, B, and C." I
Mhm.
can tell my spiritual health by being
Yeah.
like, "Why does she hate me?"
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it's like,
Yeah, that's
wait a
real.
minute, like, no, it's like, no, it's separate. This has nothing to do with me. It's not my worth. It's not my value.
When
It's like,
you're in healthy seasons, my guess
Yeah.
is she gives you that feedback. You're like, hey, thanks for making it better.
oh my gosh, I'm like,
Yeah.
doggone, she's right. This
Yeah.
is so much better.
Yep, yep,
Instead of being like, why do I suck?
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's real talk, and I go through those seasons too, and I think
Mhm.
everybody does. And so spiritual and emotional maturity is we need to pursue. Well,
Mhm.
spiritual maturity I think is assumed. I mean, the nature of this podcast, we're
Mhm.
trying to help people understand what it means to follow Jesus more deeply.
Mhm.
Emotional maturity is not often it's kind of ignored in the church, but that's why we talk about counseling. That's why we talk about being open and honest with what you're going through.
Mhm.
It's to because we want to be the healthiest.
Mhm.
Look, man, we talk about this all the time. God's vision for your life is to know Him. So that starts with giving your life to Christ, walk with Him. That means walking in a personal relationship with God day in and day out, together, fully follow. And His vision for your life is to join Him in His work in this world. All right. So think about this for a second. How do I join God in His work if I'm not physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally healthy? It's very hard to do. So I want to be at my best to join God in His work in this world. And I'm not always. I'm just trying to say that we're doing this out of a sense of God's placed us here for a reason.
Yeah.
And that matters.
Yeah.
Emotional health matters.
For me, one of the things that I do to get out of that conversation is I sometimes apologize and express my own need. Yeah. So
Mhm.
it's sometimes saying like, I'm sorry that I can't go on anymore in the conversation. I'm sorry I can't, but I feel frustrated and I feel disappointed and right now what I can't keep going. So I'm sorry that I can't keep going, but it's sometimes it's making the person not feel
Yeah.
you're expressing like, hey, it's not you.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's
right.
me. I can't do this anymore. I
Yeah.
can't have this conversation
Yeah.
anymore at this level. So I find that it diffuses the person because it's like they can't argue with the fact that you're saying I'm done.
Yeah. And it's
Um,
funny. I think there's too, like, even, I don't know, I'm thinking out loud on this a little bit,
Yeah.
but I think there's something to, we also assume that a crucial conversation needs to have apologies from both sides. It's funny, like sometimes this works out with my kids where I think that what they're thinking is like, oh, like mom's disappointed in me. And so like I've also found myself saying like, hey buddy, there's nothing to be sorry. Like you don't need to apologize. I just like needed to make sure that like we're tracking. I wanted to hear your perspective. Or not
Yeah,
you know
that's
what I
good.
mean? Telling him I wanted to hear what you think about this. Because sometimes actually I think we assume it has to resolve itself in someone being right, someone being wrong,
Yeah,
and
that's
that you
true.
have to apologize. When sometimes I think that level of candor, I mean, how many times even like in the New Testament was Jesus even calling out like the disciples or people he was traveling with, right? I don't know how many times it was that they then needed to actually apologize versus Jesus just saying, hey, time out. Like, if we're going to keep doing this thing together, can we just like have a conversation and like kind of like get back to work?
Yeah.
So I also, yeah, I think sometimes we assume that we have to be sorry
I
in
love what
them,
you
and I
said,
don't think we
actually.
have to.
Yeah, I actually really like that because I think what you said a moment ago that really resonated with me was you said that only the context for that is if someone had to, at the end of the day, still had to win
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. But the point of tough conversations isn't winning, it's shared meaning. It's
Yeah.
going back to that's the whole point of a tough conversation. It's for me to be more fully known now, like
Mhm.
I need to get it out
Yep.
and to understand you better.
Mm-hmm.
And if that happened,
Yep.
we won.
Yep.
So there may not be apologies or anything like that because that's not even the point. I just need you to know, hey, every time you do that, that thing or whatever, you're making
This
the
is what
rest
it
of the
feels
team.
like.
This is what it feels like to the rest of the team.
Yeah.
I'm watching. We're done. Like I
Right.
just need to tell you that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I now the benefit of the doubt. This is kind of getting into how you do those things. But it's like because I don't think that's your desire.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I figured you would want to know that, but I feel like
Totally.
I'm seeing that. So, I mean,
Because
like
there's
that
a
opens
lot of
up.
there's a lot of iron that sharpens iron, I think, like in crucial conversations that really wasn't from a fault.
Yep.
It was just, hey, I know you care about X, so do I.
Yeah.
Let's like, I didn't want to leave you hanging on that if I could help you.
Yeah. And this is where it gets really. This is when we're talking about the most idealistic
Totally.
sort of. But I think
course.
that's good. That's what we are shooting for. What you play it. Let's keep playing out that scenario. What you hope for in that moment, you might get a small little window into their world. Now we're talking about shared meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And they say something like, oh, I do keep pushing for that because I felt ever since I joined this team, everybody else is tenured. I'm not. And I'm just trying to let them know I got what it takes. Oh, well, they believe in you.
Right.
And so it's like, now we're talking about the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
You were just you felt a little insecure. No, oh, we can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even about, I could get you to stop talking.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't created shared meaning yet.
Right.
The shared meaning is the vulnerability of going, hey, it's feeling this way. Oh yeah, that's because of this.
Mhm.
Oh well, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
So
And avoiding crucial conversations or tough conversations, you miss out on
you
that
never
richness.
get to that. You never got to that.
Yeah.
And then all of your relationships feel surfacey. And like,
Yep.
then you look up one day and you're like, man, why am I missing the richness? And that's like what you were saying
Yeah.
a moment ago about the intimacy on the
That's
other
right.
side of that.
That's right. That's the intimacy, and not romantic and all
Right.
that. Intimacy is just a deeper knowledge of
Totally.
someone else. You just got that with a coworker because
Right.
you were willing to say
Yes.
something that others
The-
might not have been.
This is
Yeah.
the beauty of not living in the status quo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, don't live in the status quo. You know, I'm going to be honest. There's 3 things that I've learned about having, I've been at LCBC for 22 years. Like, I've worked here. And I think this is probably one of the most healthy interpersonal relationship places that I've ever experienced. And a lot of it is because we have difficult conversations all the time. But here's the 3 things that I think every conversation seems to be dripping with. One is, if you can tell an LCBC difficult conversation or crucial conversation when there's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
It's always questions. Like, hey, I noticed, but can you help me understand? Or what was your thought process when? Or
Mhm.
hey, this happened. Can you explain, what was going on?
Mm-hmm.
Allowing for you to understand that you don't understand.
Deeper
Mhm.
understanding.
The
Yep,
question
yep.
basically is
Yeah.
saying, like, I get that there's probably more to the story. Can I ask a question and you help me understand? And instead of saying this is what happened,
Mm.
say, what happened?
Yeah.
The other thing is when you're looking to understand the other side. So, or explain what it was like, not what you intended.
Mhm.
Mm.
So I've had this conversation probably hundreds of times with staff, volunteers, students, where I say, something, and it has carried into my personal life,
Mm.
where I say this. I go, I don't think you intended to come across this way,
Mm.
Yeah.
but this is what it was like on the other side of you.
Such a great way of getting into something because you're telling them at that point you believe you're not it's not a personal attack on
Yeah,
their
you
character.
believe in their
You
character.
believe in their character.
Totally.
Yes.
Where so many times where I'm talking to someone and saying, like, I know you and I know you would never intend it to
Yeah.
be like this.
Mhm.
But this is what it felt like when
Yep.
you said that, when you were short tempered with, well, like, it just felt like
Yep.
you were angry at everyone. And that's what it
Mhm.
felt like on the other side of you. It's not saying you're an angry person. It's saying
Yeah.
that came across as angry and maybe you didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, how can I help? There's always this
Mm.
understanding is like, how can I help you? Is there
Mm.
something I can do? Is there
Mhm.
something I can do to help you with this? Is there something I can do? Is there something I'm not doing? Is there some way I can assist you?
Yeah.
Those 3 things, the asking questions, explaining, not assuming the intentions of the
The
person,
worst. Yeah.
and asking how I can assist,
Mhm.
have been practiced by me at least, and I know everyone else at LCBC. Those conversations seem to go a lot better because of those 3 things.
Yeah.
And we can't there's probably something in the middle there that I think you're giving this high level stuff, but also in the middle of that, if you drill down, there's also then the clarity of expectations.
Mm.
So you do need that. So I
Mhm.
don't want people hearing that. Look, when I'm talking to my kids, I go into a tough conversation. It's not just, hey, I don't think you would. I'll start with, I know you're not trying. I've done this constantly with my teenagers. Is I know you're not trying to come. I don't believe you're trying to come off this way. But what you did to Solomon, that's our little guy. That was mean. Like I feel like that came across this. Did you see how he was right? So I'm starting there, but then I need to get to you can't go there anymore.
Right.
Yes.
Like that's not
Mhm.
that's not how we're going to treat each other.
Mhm.
So you can't just be, oh no, I didn't mean that. All right,
Mhm.
good, we're done.
Yeah, that's good. That's a 4th thing is
Yeah.
like set
Clarity.
clarity
Yeah.
of
You need clarity
expectation.
of expectation.
That's good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah,
And I
that's
think
definitely
sometimes
something.
we back off that one just a little bit.
Mhm.
Because
you-
we're
and you
so
shouldn't.
excited to get through these 3.
Yeah.
We're like,
It's like we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
happening. I
You-
said
you-
it.
But here's the problem with that. And then we resent the people
Right.
because we weren't clear with what the expectations were.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so if
Sure.
you're not clear with what the expectations were, you forfeit your right to be mad when they
Right.
don't live up to them.
Yeah, because then it's just a matter of time. You guys are gonna you find yourself in that same conversation, and it's like, oh, because I never actually said stop
That's
yelling
right.
at your sister,
Right. That's
or
right.
whatever.
Yep.
oh, that's
It's
I
like you
never
yelled again.
told you to stop shrinking my sweaters.
Yeah.
I thought that's what you liked. I thought Jenny loved that.
Yeah, I thought cropped were in.
Yeah.
I thought she
Just
loved
for
when I
men.
shrank her sweaters. So
Good
okay,
conversation, Chad.
let's do one last question.
hmm
what happens when a relationship has been damaged? Let's say a crucial conversation didn't go well.
You just started another podcast, like a whole other episode.
I did, and this is
See
hour
episode
2.
56, number 56.
But let's say, what do you do if a conversation didn't go so well? Like, maybe some people they're listening to this a couple weeks late, and they're like,
yeah.
I just came out of that. And
Well, it's never too late. Go back and have it again. Have it again the right way. Never too late. Never too late to go back and say, hey, can we do a do-over? I was trying to, here's what I was trying to articulate. I don't think I articulated that well. Own it. Even if it's not, just own it, even if it's not as a way of honoring them. And, or I should say, above yourself. Consider others as better than yourself, Philippians 2. Even if it's not, just say, I own my part in that. And let's do a do-over. Because I do have some things I feel like I need to share in it that I want to talk through with you, or at least make sure I've talked through. So that's what I would say is it's never too late. That's the nature of relationships. Relationships are ongoing and in process. So go back, have it again.
I think there's something good. It's having faith that God can restore everything. So many of us as Christians, we believe that God can do miracles, except for in relationships. Like we believe that we're like, God can cure cancer, God can do anything, but yet when it comes to that spouse, that sibling, they'll never change.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we believe that God put the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky, but we don't believe he can change a heart.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not true. God can totally change a heart.
Yeah, and we truly don't have time to go into this, but my heart does feel for then the people, because I think this happens a lot where you do it right now, and the other person doesn't respect that.
Yeah.
You've told them, hey, you shrinking my sweaters.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know, it just feels like I would love if you just pay a little bit more. Okay, cool. And it just keeps happening.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? Now you've got a choice in front of you, which is you've either got to adjust your expectations, that gap.
Mm-hmm.
That is one way of closing the gap is go, cool, I let that go.
Yep. And
I'm
sometimes that's the right thing
And
to do.
sometimes that is the right thing to do.
Yep.
Or you draw boundaries.
Yes.
And you go, I can't change my expectations, so now I got to draw some boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Now that truly is a whole nother podcast. But and there's a godly way of doing that as well.
Yeah.
There's actually 2 episodes of the podcast that I'd like to reference, and I'll put them in the show notes. One is we did a podcast with Gary Chapman, Dr. Gary Chapman.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And in that, he talked about him and his wife, and sometimes like the cabinets never get closed, and you have to decide, am I going to divorce my wife or accept that the cabinets will never go closed?
Yeah.
But we also did a podcast on boundaries, and I think sometimes you have to decide, okay, now this is the new status quo of the relationship, and that will require some boundaries. So we'll link to those so that people can have some further discussion. So closing thoughts, as people are getting ready to have crucial conversations, and this is not us speaking to people listening. I just want to be clear. I have at least 2 conversations in my head right now that I am in days away from having. Yeah. And so
exciting, isn't it?
Boy, you and I have a very different definition of exciting.
I have some that terrify me.
I'm much more in the terrified level, and I would tend to rest on like, or how cozy is status quo? Yeah. This is so warm and safe, and if I never have it, then we can just keep living like this.
Yeah.
But I know I can't, and it's hard. So we are coming from this table to your living room, your car, wherever you're listening. We get it. These conversations are difficult to have, and we're praying for you as we ask that you pray for us as we have them, because as followers of Jesus Christ, we don't get a choice.
We have to love, we have to honor, we have to live with grace and truth. Do not sacrifice on either one. You do all truth, and without the grace, you've missed it. You do all grace and you don't tell the truth, you've missed it. That's not right. You cannot honor someone by being flowery. You honor someone by clarity. You honor someone in respect. You give them the dignity of being a human being and being responsible for their actions and taking agency of their life by being clear that what you did was hurtful. That is dignifying.
Yeah.
It's not dishonoring. You can do that in a dishonoring way, but telling the truth is always the most honoring thing.
Yeah.
And that takes courage.
Story time. Let's end with this. Is there ever a time that you had one of these crucial conversations and you're so glad you did?
Oh my gosh. I mean, like 1,000.
Okay.
Just within my marriage, with
Yeah.
Jenny, there's a ton where, we finally decided to talk about the thing underneath the thing, and would you know, it's right. There's deepening intimacy on the other side because there's a shared pool of meaning now that you both have.
Yeah.
It's happened in every significant relational sphere of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that moment with my kids, had that moment with Jenny, I've had that moment with coworkers, I've had that moment with people at our church. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. It's funny. And I mean, I would tell you this just happened probably a couple of weeks ago. And like I had built up this conversation with Kevin so much in my head. And so actually after a counseling appointment, like was sharing it with her. And she's like, you have to talk to him. Like you can't not talk about this, right? And I would say because of all of the other work we've done, we had that conversation. And you know what he said to me? Because he's amazing. He was like, you know what? I'm really trying to work on that. Thanks for saying something. And all day, that is not what I was expecting to happen.
That is awesome. Yeah.
And the whole time you're tugging on your too tight sweater. Thank you.
So I know that sounds like a very like cheery bow, but I mean, that's like almost 15 years of marriage and hard work. Right.
Yeah.
And so not every conversation is like that. And so I don't want to end on like such a like tied up in a bow kind of, but that is the fruit.
That's what's possible.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it was amazing. And I'm sure we've argued since then. Right.
Yep.
But yeah.
We got to get Kevin on here. I feel bad. I feel bad for the guy.
Hey, I said he's amazing.
Yeah.
No, I know. You've always been very honoring. I'm more just mean. Yeah. We have all these stories about him.
I know.
Ironically, spouses. When Jenny came on, it's one of our number one episodes of the podcast. If you haven't watched that episode, we brought Jason's spouse Jenny on, and we discovered, just what a lovely person she is. So, for me too. I've had those kind of conversations, not just with Steph, but with other people where. I never regret having the honest, godly conversation with people, but I have regretted not having it because even if it doesn't go well, there's a righteousness about doing what God tells us to do.
I feel the same way. I've had so many conversations that I've dreaded going into, and every single one of them on the other side, I've gone, I'm so glad I did. But it was a week of anxiety. It was a week of butterflies.
Yeah.
Totally. And then you get through with it, and you're like, I'm so glad that's done. That's off. They're not always great. Most of them have gone well, but I mean, some of them have not.
Yep.
But it doesn't matter. You're still on the other side of it, and like, I'm just so glad.
Right.
Because it's not in me anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like throwing up, honestly. It's like throwing up.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, oh, I didn't want to do it. It was awful when it was happening, but man, do I feel better.
Yeah. That's good.
Well, thank you so much for watching the Live Change podcast. And for all of you that are looking down the barrel of one of those difficult conversations, just know that you're not alone. God's ready to go into that conversation with you and handle the conversation with love and grace and self-discipline. If you enjoyed this episode of the Live Change podcast, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and leave us comments. We love your comments. And as always, now that you're a life changed by Christ, go live that change out.